Hey guys, welcome to another developer interview here without Parole. With me this week is Jay, the CEO of White Moon Dreams, developer of Starblood Arena. Jay, how you doing, man? Thanks for joining us.
What's going on, Brian? Really good to be here.
It's really good to be here, despite all of the technical hurdles we had to overcome to get here today.
Let me just go on the record right now and say this: I hate Skype.
Yeah, you're not alone on that. You have a lot of friends in the Skype hate community.
Once it used to be my friend, now it's just a fucking piece of shit.
We're off to a great start, man. I love how this interview's going already. All right, well let's I know this is going to be a different interview than all the ones I've conducted so far. I have a feeling that you have a lot to say. There's a lot to talk about as far as the life and death of Starblood Arena, and I kind of just want to start at the absolute beginning and just get the ball rolling here, man. Can you tell us where this all began? Like, who is White Moon Dreams? How did you all get together? What's the deal, man?
Oh man, all right. So White Moon Dreams, like my buddy Scott, Robert Scott Campbell, and I started thinking up the company many years ago, like in 2000. In 2005, we really started discussing it along with a couple other friends, and I was at EA at the time, and he was at Sony. We kind of were exploring the idea of just starting something on our own, and finally in 2006 we decided to just bounce and start the whole thing. And we've done lots and lots of stuff, from between that point and Starblood. But a lot of it was like under wraps, a lot of like R&D for the game industry and all that sort of thing. We helped build tools and engines, and like there's new hardware initiatives coming up, and we were on them because my background's heavily in R&D and tech, and his background is really in like creative direction and like game design. Actually, Scott is the individual who actually conceived the original Fallout design back in 1991. So he was working with Tim Kaine and Leonard Boyarsky and all those folks like back at Interplay, and he has like just piles and piles of documents on it. He's such a prolific designer, so we actually kind of built the studio for him, like make Scott's games. So that was kind of the idea from the studio for the studio. So we did lots of stuff, and we were actually in 2014 we were kind of forced to release our first major title, WARMACHINE Tactics. We were forced to release it pre-alpha, and it was kind of a disaster of a release. And so like while the team had a lot of heat going into it, like everyone was super excited because the development was going really well. When we were pushed to suddenly release it, it took all the air out of our tires, and like there was funding was getting tight and all that sort of thing, and we still wanted to support it, and at the same time like the studio was starting to like decline, and we decided to take some of the folks that were starting to peel off of WARMACHINE because their stuff was finishing, and they kind of got this crazy idea to kind of like what would happen if we went we kind of like built like the spiritual successor to Descent, because actually we have an individual here, Rusty Buchert, who was also at Interplay at the time, like one of the guys behind Descent, producer on it, he was actually like, we were like, let's go after the IP, let's get all that stuff, and basically like I can't remember who exactly owned the IP, but they basically told us to fuck off or give them like $8 million or something. So we were like, wow. All right, whatever. So a bunch of folks were like, we want to do something with this, but we got to do it in VR. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Are you going to waste like what little money we have and all this on VR, right? The shit is going to like die in like 2 years or whatever, because that's what always happens to it. And they're like, no, we got to do it in VR. It's so cool. It's going to be big this time, and Kickstarted this and that and the other thing. And I was like, all right, well, there's enough of you going for it. Like whatever help you need, just let me know. Let's do it. And man, those guys fucking came through. In like a month, they had like knocked out this prototype, and so we started talking with people, and like you talk to. Of course, you talk to like game publishers, and game publishers are like, VR, we don't know about all that shit, and you talk to, and then you got to go to like the hardware people, the people that are manufacturing the hardware, and say like, hey, you want like some showcase piece for your platform, and like just for folks who don't know how the game industry works kind of similar to book publishing for most developers. Most developers don't have tons of cash lying around to actually make their stuff. You gotta have an idea. You gotta do more than get it down on paper. You actually have to get it to some level of playable, and then you gotta take it to somebody who can finance it and say, all right, look, we'll do this for this amount of money, and then we'll split the revenue this way. And a lot of times, I mean, like, what is it? Something like maybe like 5% of games actually make money, right? So you try and figure out, most publishers or financiers or whatever are trying to figure out a way to make sure that they at least get all, they break even on the way in, in the first few months. So we created the whole package. We created a PowerPoint, and we created we had this demo, and we got ourselves dressed up really nice, and we went around to all these different places and showed it. And I remember we talked to one group who specifically, hardware group who specifically said, like, there's absolutely no way that this game will work, right? Because you can't have people in a spaceship, right? You can't have them moving, like strafing left to right, much less doing barrel rolls and all that shit. And they were like, you guys should just kill this now. Just go make some game with like, look, we're looking into teleporting for locomotion, and we're like, that's fucking bullshit, right? Because by the time this game comes out, like, the players aren't going to want that kind of locomotion to be their only form of locomotion. It has to be like an FPS. If we're going to make an FPS, we're making a real fucking FPS, and we're not just going to make like like an on your feet, like run around like shooter. Like, we want to be in space. We want to go that much farther beyond. And they were like, you are on fucking crack. Get the fuck out of our office. Like, we were routinely told that. But then, I don't know, for some reason we went to Sony, and in like, I don't know what the fuck happened, man. Like they were like, yeah, let's have the meeting. And then half an hour they were like, great, let's do a contract. And like, I remember just like, my head was spinning. I was like, what just happened in there? Because that never happens, Yeah. Like, usually you go in and somebody, they all smile politely. They look at you like you're a poor, sad mental patient. And then they go out the door and don't return your emails, right? So, but these guys were just like, yeah, this is the deal. And I think a lot of that was like that message actually has been fairly consistent from Sony from that day, right? They were like, we're making PSVR, we're going in really fucking heavy, and regardless of how many people pick it up or whatever, we're not quitting, right? Because we're coming in first, and like we're planning the long haul here. And as a developer, like, there's you think about that two ways, right? You think about that like, holy shit, that's fucking cool, these guys are all in. And then you also think, wow, I just got fed the biggest load of bullshit, right?
Can you give me a time frame of like when this meeting happened?
This was in 2014. This was in 2014. This was, I think, 2 years before PSVR came out. Okay. I think. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say that, but there it is. They actually, like, honestly, like, I think the industry has known that Sony has been kind of working on PSVR for such a long time. It actually predates Oculus. It had been a thing that, as a developer, like, they had been toying, like, I'd seen them toying around with this stuff. It was on the, like, it was like whispered in the halls at GDC and all that, like 7 years ago, even more than 7 years ago, actually now over 10 years ago. Yeah, they've been always playing around with this stuff. Someone there was really crazy about it, and I think they had this great technologist, Richard Marks, who I think is at Google now. Not the one who sang "Hold On to the Night" or whatever from the '80s, but like this dude's like this like this sort of futurist tech guy who led a lot of their R&D efforts. I think he may have been the one pushing a lot of this, but man, like they went heavy on it, and they like from that moment they were so supportive. It was craziness. They were always getting like the PSVR developers together. They were trying as much as they could to like have us see like other folks' games, other PSVR games in development that they were able to show us. So that we can learn from them and see what they were doing, and stuff like that. So that was really cool, and we got assigned this fantastic producer. I think it was one of his first projects. I think that he did completely on his own. It was giving him Starblood. I think it was. I'm not 100% sure, but he was sort of our internal champion, and also helped us with all of the logistics on the Sony side of things. So kind of like pairing him and us up was like this magical this magical combo. It was pretty awesome. So from the get-go, we started out with building this more of a prototype. So the initial prototype was literally just like one ship kind of flying around through a couple of hallways and shooting some things. And we had our composer, like I chose our composer early on. This guy Alex Melia, who goes by the name Rezo in the music scene. He's a big like electronic music producer. So he kind of put together like a pretty banging soundtrack for us, and like we had that as our initial sort of like proof of concept or something like that. But then Sony was like, all right, let's do like a proper what we call a vertical slice. And so what a vertical slice is you take like a piece of the game, right, and you build that out to the visual quality that you want it to be, the gameplay quality that you want it to be. There's enough gameplay features in there that properly express what the game is going to be. So like anybody who looks at it, and anybody who plays it, you can say to them, if you like this, the rest of the game is this, right? Just more of this. Yeah. It's like the perfect way to really prove your vision out. So Sony was like, let's go there. Let's build that first. And so we went through that, and that was such an interesting time, because the PSVR hardware was also very early at the time. So we were having to deal with things like on one end we have the hardware that early hardware that is maybe not running at full frame rate, or maybe is not like sitting on your head right, or hurts your nose like if you've got it on for 30 minutes or something. And on the other end, we're working with the Unreal Engine, which was also kind of new at the time, Unreal 4. We had released WARMACHINE in it, and the engine wasn't completely finished at that point, but it was still. But where we were at with Starblood, it was still pretty new. So there was we had some issues there. Plus, we didn't know what the fuck we were doing in terms of like making the game fast or anything like that. Like this was the first time we were trying to do a full production game really in VR. So we were screwing up things. So what this meant was that the game would constantly have problems, like really early on, and everybody was getting sick all the time. we had QA. Like I remember QA, like each individual in QA would work like these. They would have a half-hour window where they could work, and then they would be sick for like 3 hours, and then somebody else would have to cycle in, right? Wow. Yeah, because it was that perfect storm of new hardware, new engine, and developer in a new medium. But we were all so amped to do this, right? Because at the same time, like while all that stuff is going on, while we're like slaving through all the comfort stuff and all that, art is going to town, right? Art is just building out the characters, and they're working with design to build out the lore, and what happens when you do that? So like we have art going up everywhere, like people are seeing the characters like starting to show up in the game and things like that, and it's kind of like it's kind of like like when you're like you're going to school and you're sitting next to this girl and you're in grade school and all that, and it's funny and you're like passing notes and all that, and then like one day you notice like her hair is done differently and you're like, I think that's kind of cute, but I don't know if I want to say something, right? And like basically she starts to grow on you over the years, and then by the time you get to high school or something, you're just like, holy shit, this is my jam, right? And by the time we got to Vertical Slice, we were in mad fucking love with this whole world, and everybody's talking about like, oh, I wish this character was like this, and I wish this ship was like that, and I wish we could do this or the other thing, and blah blah blah. And what was great was the whole time, right? Like, so Sony fell in love with it super early. They fell in love with it earlier than like mad love than we did earlier, because they had like we had people like Shu Yoshida being like, oh yeah, I'm playing this game all day.
Nice.
Right? Because those guys could really see like all the way through to the finished product. I mean, that's why you have people like Scott Rhodey and Shu Yoshida, because they can look at something that's like a gray box with a box jumping around and be like, oh, that's the game that's going to make us like monsters, right? So, so we're like, we've now become completely invested in the lore of this game, what the world actually is and all that, like much more than than just like the gameplay itself. So there's so much of that that's still on the cutting room floor, so we got to Vertical Slice, and we really got to show it. They have a couple of internal events that are just purely for Sony devs and stuff like that, and we showed it there, and we got a lot of like fantastic response. And those internal events are really hilarious. They're so great because they're so raw, right? Like everyone sees like these really polished like E3 things and all that, and I've been at some of the big companies. I remember when I was at EA, and Sony was similar in this way. You go to the EA booth at E3 back when they used to be at E3, and it's just this monstrous, beautiful showcase, right? Like you're going through from living room to living room, looking at whatever turd they're putting up, but then. And there's all these like gorgeous people showing you the game, and they don't know anything but the lines they've recited and all that. But it's a very polished experience, right? And then every now and then you'll run into a developer who will really be able to explain to you like all kinds of stuff about the game. Sony's like that, except a lot of their games are really fucking awesome, and they, usually they have the developers actually talking about it. But then if you go to like their sort of the internal events for any of these like big companies or anything like that, like it's just like, okay, there's a folding table and somebody slapped some computers down, and like where you're hauling a bunch of like wire and all this cabling, and you're trying to slap all that stuff together. And I remember like at some point we had flown a couple of our engineers over to some event, and they're like, we're like, bring USB drives and bring this stuff, and everyone's trying to piece all this stuff together. But the nice thing about stuff like that is you get a bunch of developers in the room, and when you have developers appreciating other developers' games, that's the real shit, right? If a developer likes something, because these guys, like everybody sees this stuff all day, and they're not just trying to be nice anymore, right? You can tell when they put on the headset or something, and they're like, okay, right, whatever, right? You can put on the headset, you can see them turn green, you got that, or you can see them like be like, oh shit, this is really cool, right? And like actually, speaking specifically about like having like other Sony developers look at this stuff, like it was really fucking cool, because these guys are everybody's doing PSVR stuff, so they're all super excited about what they're doing. You would think that they're all jaded because it's people like Gorilla and all these dudes who are like super big and really, really, have like massive engineering teams. And our engineering team was like, for Starblood initially it was like 5, and they're looking at the shit and they're just like, well, we may have to steal this idea. And we're like, oh shit, this is really cool. And So, like the community overall, the development community, and this is largely because of Sony. They're so supportive, and they actually continue to be to this day. If any developers are out there, thinking about developing a PSVR title, fucking do it, because you'll learn so much, and Sony is really cool to deal with all this stuff. So. So we moved past vertical slice. Once we hit vertical slice, and we knew that we had a lot of support, from Sony on this. Then the focus turned to finishing out the whole game. And actually, around that time, our scope actually changed much for the better, because there was a lot of questions around. We didn't have the whole progression system in there. We didn't have a whole lot of leveling up or winning, being able to unlock all the stuff for your ship and all that sort of thing. We didn't have that in there, but it was becoming clear that we needed to have a little bit more of that. So we kind of we started building that into the whole design. And so that made multiplayer also a little bit bigger and actually much more worthwhile, at least for the first timers. I mean, we did see that within the first week, I think somebody had unlocked everything in the game, when they first grabbed Starblood, because all that stuff reports back to Sony servers, and that just goes to the old saying we have in the industry of you can never develop too much content. You could just keep making shit, and people will just eat it up. And that was we were literally making stuff up until the very last moment to ship. It was just this guy made a teddy bear. Okay, throw it in there, right? And Sony was like, cool, whatever you got, put it in. So that was really cool. While we were doing that too, we also started exploring, and you heard it here first, but I don't know if I should be saying this, but here goes. We started exploring the concept of what happens if we open up the game in a way to people who are not necessarily, who don't have PSVR, right? Or are maybe not even on a PlayStation. What if you could participate in the game from anywhere? So we started experimenting with that, and we came up with a prototype, and it was really fucking cool. It was really good, but there was some additional functionality we actually needed in the PS4, which was going to make it actually difficult to ship with, and we would have had to wait for several SDK updates and things like that just would have pushed our ship date out too far. But it's something. It's a piece of tech that we've kind of we've also matured at the studio. It was something that we were building kind of alongside Starblood for something else, but it kind of dovetailed into Starblood really nicely. And we've matured it here, so we might see it roll out maybe this year or next year, but yeah, I mean one of the focus points for us during Starblood, as much as people won't see it because Starblood is definitely a PSVR only, a VR only game. But we actually had put a lot of thought into how can we get people who are not in VR participating, right, and incentivize them to try out VR, because there was so much, we were still I admit that I was totally wrong with saying that VR wasn't going to work, right? It was thank God for my staff, right, because those people everyone pushed really hard and they made it happen. Then they showed me that there's I wouldn't say that there was a market as much, but there was definitely enough of an appeal that warranted doing something like this for us, especially being such an R&D heavy company. So we're kind of going along and building this stuff out, and our release date was actually fluctuating because the slate the 2017 slate was constantly fluctuating. So it was kind of like, oh, you got to come out after this title, or you got to come out before this title, or this title needs more time, or something like that. So there's like a whole lot of flux there. So we're kind of like working towards this slowly shifting release date, and there was a lot of firsts happening at Sony too, because Sony has such a high bar of quality, especially for anything that's coming out of first party, and it is not unreasonable, but it is hard. It's hard as shit. And anybody who ships first party games, you ship a first party Nintendo game, it's like it's rough and tough because it's their name on there that comes first, right? It's typically, most games go through like a third party publisher. It'll be like Sony, then EA or Ubisoft or Take-Two or whatever, and then it'll be developer, developer. But this is pretty much a Sony release, and we're pretty, in a lot of ways operating as an internal Sony team. So the bar, so they actually have like kind of like a different level of quality that you must hit in order to ship. And they had actually formed a group that did specific VR quality checking, and it was a bitch. It was hard as shit. But a lot of stuff. I mean, they were right. They were right. Like, this is not comfortable. You can't drop it below this frame rate. You can't maintain a certain frame rate and then suddenly drop or go up or something like that. Like, all kinds of rules that you're not always subject to. But their focus was always on user comfort, and I think that's one of the reasons why PSVR is as successful as it is, because Sony drives that concept really hard, right? So that's super cool.
This team you're talking about, the group that they've put together, it's kind of infamous at this point. This is the Sony certification process that's like half impossible to get through for most developers' standpoints, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, so at least like the end result is good. Like, even if it's like you said, it's a bitch to get through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It guarantees quality. That's really what needs to happen. That's what, like, I do believe that if anybody wants to launch a VR on their console, because a console you expect to just plug it in for it to be awesome, right? I know Sony did a lot of research on how to do that itself with PSVR. But then if you're gonna convince like a player to actually buy this thing, you have to make it so that when they buy it, they don't feel like shit, after the first 30 minutes, right? So their everything is really, really rigorous. So we went. We around the end of 2016, we started going into that, and then Sony was like, "Okay, guys, like, you're coming close to release, and we have a long way to go." And this usually happens with games. Right, like usually you've got like 5 or 6 months left on the project or something like that, or really I should say you have 15, 10 to 15% of the project time left, the total project time left, and it looks like the game is only 40% complete, right? And that's a lot of times because only like a few people can actually see the entire game stitched together. For the rest of the time, like, everyone's kind of working in their own silos, like building these pieces, silently trying to get them to work with everyone else's pieces, and like crying quietly all day, right? But then you spend those last months slamming everything together, working out the kinks, and really, honestly, like, every game is like fucking duct tape and baling wire to like get out the door, right? And Starblood is no less. And in fact, actually, the industry kind of the gamers got to see a little bit of that, because we came out with some of the duct tape and the baling wire like hanging off, right? Like, and we had to patch. I mean, but while we were in format, which is when the discs are being manufactured and the trucks are driving them out and stuff like that, we were busily working on the day one patch, So, and some of that was our fault, right? So because the project had gone out of scope, we had slipped in a few places here and there, but we brought it all back together. Some of that was shifting dates. Some of that was just trying to hit like different windows, things like that. So we launched with now while all this is going on, we're also constantly, usually in a game, about at the very beginning of the game, like a marketing team comes in and says, we're going to be the team that's actually handling the marketing for this game, and we're just interested to see what you guys have to do, and your prototype looks great or poor, or I'm not sure how to sell this, or I know exactly how to sell this, or whatever. They give you some initial feedback or something. So what was interesting is at the beginning, this was the first time we didn't have a lot of information on what marketing wanted to do. So we were like, oh, okay, cool. Maybe Sony is just generally figuring out like PSVR marketing strategy, whatever, So we're going along, and then we start getting a little worried, right? Like, where is marketing? Okay, you guys gonna? So they introduced us to a couple of people, and those people were really great marketing folks. But what we started realizing was that we weren't really going to be getting a whole lot of marketing support, So we were like, I remember we were in like January of 2017, and we're like, okay, guys, we're like, a few months from launch. What is the plan? Is there going to be maybe like a commercial, or are we going to be part of some larger commercial, or is there going to be, like what's going on here? And they were like, we're going to give you a blog post, and we're going to, you guys we can push you on Twitter and this and that and the other thing. And we're like, guys, that's, and honestly, like, it was really hard to be pushing and know that it was going to go out into kind of a vacuum, right? And we were kind of hopeful because there weren't a whole lot of PSVR titles out there, but we didn't know who else was going to talk about it, because not many people were talking about VR on the whole. There's like Upload VR, and there was we know that like Push Square does stuff every now and then. There's and there's folks like you but just like so the folks who would talk about the game were not going to be enough, right? And we're trying to tell them from the whole time, for forever, like, this is a multiplayer game, right? We've built a lot of single player, but this is a multiplayer game. We need people to jump in there and fucking play the game so that they'll keep playing the game. Like, you can even have a crappy multiplayer game, and if you have a bunch of people in there playing it, you'll have people playing it for forever. But like, this was tough because then we started to see that there was actually going to be almost nothing, and we didn't have. It's not like we as developers could kind of go rogue and start doing marketing and PR ourselves, because at the end of the day, even though we came up with the idea and all this stuff, we don't have the control over it, because since Sony is paying for it, they own the IP. So we can't just do whatever we want. So we were just like, okay, put our heads down and develop and hope for the best. Hope that it will be a sleeper hit. Which it came out, and the number one response that we got was, "Oh, your game is out?" It was it was so hard, actually, because you pour all your love into, like, the entire studio. Like, we have multiple teams working on different things, but at some point you kind of need everybody in the studio just hands-on doing stuff, right? Like, we have a completely separate platform team that just builds game platforms, and that team at some point had to come on and actually do a bunch of work for the back end that Starblood runs off of right now on the Sony side. And so every single group in the studio was in love with this game, right? Every person And by that point, we had, we were at like something like 80 folks or something like that. So when you have 80 folks all like suddenly jump on to like one project to slam it together, you kind of form this bond, right? And people form, it's not just a bond, like a team bond, but because you sit there and you stare at the game, you really do start to like fall in love with aspects of it. And so you have these people who are like diehard into the lore and stuff like that, and people who are just loving what they were building, and then to kind of see it just go out into nothing was incredibly painful. I wish I could say our initial numbers for players, but I think that stuff is confidential. But it was really sad, so we were just trying to do what we could to actually push people into the game and keep it going so that people could find matches. But of course, we had screwed up also, right? And we had not done our matches. We had not done matchmaking in a way that allowed people to quickly find matches, right? We had too many options that people could choose from, and the matches like we were filtering too many people, right? So you would filter down to matchmaking between like single digit numbers of people or something like that, because we got so granular with it. So those are all kinds of things that we needed to fix in a patch. And Sony was like, okay, that's cool. Like, fix that shit. Let's keep it rolling. And we were able to keep releasing stuff for a little while. But even they looked at it and they said, okay, we're sorry, guys. Like the numbers of players are not the number of players that we've got don't actually warrant continuing to do like, all kinds of other Starblood stuff. And this was like, because we had all kinds of other stuff for Starblood planned. And on one hand, you want to be upset because like they didn't do the marketing, right? And on the other hand, it's kind of like, okay, well, even if they had done marketing, how many folks would they reach? Did we release a multiplayer game too early, right? And I remember reading magazine articles or like reviews and stuff like that, and the number one thing that we got slammed on was actually not having enough players in multiplayer. Right, so there's always that question of, did we do the right thing by releasing a multiplayer-heavy game so early in the PlayStation VR lifecycle?
So back in January 2018, like for 2 months, Starblood became a PlayStation Plus game. It was a free game. So was this part of Sony's like push to like try to like increase the player base?
Oh, yeah, it was. Like we were like begging them like. We were begging them, like, please, 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 make it a Plus game, right? So everyone can get it. And so it was. And during that time, actually, that is when we saw our highest engagement. Our numbers jumped pretty significantly, and we actually had a pretty good tail of people like constantly playing it. But for a game like Starblood, and like I'm sure all your players know, right? Like if you play any sort of game these days, right, they're releasing some kind of DLC every 3 to 6 months, or there's some promise of it. There's stuff like that. So we kind of hit that 3-month mark, after PS Plus, and the numbers just kind of started to peter out because people have eaten up all the content, and while they're definitely interested in continuing to play with each other, they're missing that variety, right? That variety that like something that like even just like a small new addition adds to like change things up. So we pushed for PS Plus, and Sony was awesome and gave it to us. I think we were the first PSVR title to be on PS Plus. And it did kick up the player base and all that, but we just we didn't have the content support coming to actually keep that player base engaged. And that's definitely a thing that you need, multiplayer-wise. And I think it's good because we helped pave the way in a lot of ways for multiplayer games. Like Eve Valkyrie was already out, so that was actually like there was a good seed there of folks. But we were taking a big risk along with going out without marketing and also releasing with a couple of problems that needed to be patched. So so that itself was kind of tricky, but Sony was still super supportive, and they were just like, all right, well, let's figure out what's next, because they're like PSVR for life, right? So that was all that was really cool, and we did some stuff with them for a while, and then we kind of decided to kind of go our separate ways, but yeah, the interesting thing is, so we see the numbers, we see the Starblood numbers, every single day. We see how many people are playing concurrent numbers and all that, and I think, so finally one day they called and said, hey, we got to shut down the servers, and of course we talked with them and said, what can we do? What can we do about all that? And we had some discussion back and forth, and the answer was ultimately like, we can't do anything, right? It just has to be shut down because it's a cost. It's a cost for Sony, and there's like when a game shuts down, why it's getting shut down. There's not enough people actually playing it. If the game was doing gangbusters, like in terms of like people playing it, then they'd be like, well, okay, we'll eat the cost because we got a bunch of people like engaged with PSVR. And I don't blame this on the community. I don't blame this on Sony. I can't blame this on us. This is just how it is, right? Like this is, we released in 2017. There's been a lot of great games that have come out after that. There's a lot of multiplayer stuff. A lot of people are breaking a lot of ground, multiplayer, and people should go play new stuff, especially since we haven't released anything new for Starblood, right? I wish we could. We have other pilots and ships designed. We have a lot of stuff built. We have other features and power-ups and like game modes and all this stuff. It's kind of all waiting in the wings. But I think the time has passed now. And it's sad. It's sad, but I think we over here knew it was coming. And somebody had asked me, like, it's really because players aren't playing it, right? Like, this is the player's fault. Everyone talks about wanting to play it, or like how great a game it was, but actually nobody was playing. And that's on one hand, yeah, I could see how people could think that, right? Like players, if players really want to support the game, then they should play it. But at the same time, you only have one PSVR headset, right? And when something like Firewall 0 Hour comes out, like, you pay attention, right? Like, it doesn't matter how good whatever it is that when a game, or like when Borderlands VR came out, or when Doom VFR came out, like all those things, those games were all groundbreaking in their own way and deserve to have attention as well. Like, it would be great if we could keep Starblood going, but it's nobody's fault that it's going away. I am unhappy that people aren't going to be able to continue playing the single player itself on its own, and that I'll say like that is partially our fault. When we built the single player aspect of it, what we had to do to actually run AI was so heavy. We actually had to calculate AI on the servers, and so that's why there's actually a server requirement for single player for Starblood. However, we solved that problem, and we wanted to patch it, and that's where Sony was just like, but it's too late now, right? Like it's been a few years, and actually to patch a game, it's actually a massive undertaking because it has to go through that internal QA process and all that sort of thing. So despite the fact that we'd just be happy to just patch the game and make it possible, I think it's not. I think Sony may internally look at it. This is this is just my speculation because they're not going to tell me what the actual deal is, but I think they may internally look at it and say, is that a really cost-effective way for us to spend those resources on our side? And so in reality, they just have to say no. Like I said in my post on Reddit, like, I don't want anyone to think that Sony's evil or anything like that. They're not. This wasn't a light decision for them either, because they know that it's got actually one of their guys, Steve Peer, he's the community manager on their side, and him and Matt Spencer, Grox's Belly Lint, they work closely together to announce tournaments and events and all that sort of thing. Like, that dude put his heart and soul into it, right? Like if we wanted to this day, he would support us, right? So it's not that. It's just it's just shitty business reality, So it's tough because it's we had the initial hit of releasing Starblood and not really getting that marketing backup. So after we go through all that slog and crunch and destroying the studio to actually make the game to some extent, it kind of releases with a whimper, and then you see it's nice, you see the posts every now and then of people like saying, oh, Starblood Arena is so super awesome, but then it's always kind of like, does anybody want to play with me? And you're just like, fuck. This game is so cool. It's so big. Like, fucking get all these people around and play it. But those posts also remind you of what a missed opportunity it is. And then finally, when we found out that they were going to shut down the servers, I was actually overseas at the time, so I didn't actually have time to relay the information to the staff. So some of the information came out before I got to talk with everybody, and so that was kind of like, we were already kind of like, even though Starblood came out in 2017, and we've done we've been working on a number of different things from since then. That was like our tentpole title, right? Like, that was the thing that we kind of built a lot of our identity around, and to see it, being shut down was just like, it was kind of a knife in the heart. And I know that we'll build many more games. We're working on all kinds of things here, and we've actually moved into a whole different phase of VR, really. But there's that's that girl that we had a crush on from grade school, right? And it just didn't work out, and it wasn't anybody's fault. She didn't fuck around, we didn't fuck around. It just didn't work out, and that's probably the most heartbreaking part of the entire story. So that's our story for Starblood in a nutshell, big nutshell.
That was everything from beginning to end. But that's the beginning and end of Starblood. That's not the beginning and end of White Moon Dreams.
True.
What is the plan for White Moon Dreams? Obviously, you said you're looking into a whole new wave of VR. Is PlayStation VR somewhere in that wave for you?
Yeah, it is actually. There's people may or may not know, but so we built all the demo discs for PSVR. Okay. So we did that stuff, and we actually continue to support PSVR in a couple of ways that I can't say. Okay. But yeah, we've all still got our dev kits. we're all still doing things and looking into where along with the projects that we're doing, like where is Sony going with it, and where is the industry as a whole going, there's now like basically a permanent VR group at the studio, and we've gone past PSVR in terms of what we can do VR wise. We're doing a lot more with like location based VR stuff, so things like the Void and Dreamscape and all that. So we've got we're doing full body tracking, people running around with backpacks and guns and stuff like that in large spaces, kind of taking VR to another level, more of an experience an untethered experience. Right. So there's so we've got that aspect, and then we've always had a part of the company that's also focusing on non-VR games. So non-VR games and technology. So we're doing a lot also in that space. But yeah, if we ever had the opportunity again, I mean, honestly, we'd love to actually do more Starblood. If we could do, Starblood, actually just add on to the existing Starblood would be awesome, or to do a Starblood 2, that would be amazing. But even the opportunity to really just like jump into a full-on PlayStation VR game like the size of Starblood, again, would be great. But I think at that point, I think to do stuff like that now, a lot of that has moved out of Sony proper and is now in the hands of publishers. So typically, you see like when a new piece of hardware launches, the hardware provider will actually fund a lot of the development. And I think what's happening now, we don't have any confirmation on this, but this is all my speculation, is that it's been handed to publishers saying, okay, we built this platform for you, we seeded it with users, and we seeded it with games and all that. Like it's now becoming viable. It's now becoming viable to do at least some kinds of games for it. So publishers, now you guys take up the mantle and like really make this thing happen. We're building a new platform here, so get on board. So I'm not sure. I think I'm not sure that a company like us will be offered a chance to do something as big as Starblood from a third-party publisher now, but because they're not doing it themselves. But we might look into smaller stuff. But if we had the opportunity to do something like that again, it would be dope. But until then, we support some of the other teams and do some of the R&D work on it, and then continue on with our other projects, our location-based stuff, and our non-VR projects. That's the long answer. And
yeah, it's a great answer. It's I knew you guys were like behind some of the demo disc stuff. Which for being, I've said this before on the channel, but when I first put on my PSVR headset, like I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know how good it was going to be. It showed up on launch day from Amazon. I was like, okay, here we go. Like fingers crossed. I hope this is good. And when I dropped into like the big like kind of sparkly menu screen in the demo disc, I was like, I'm sold, like from the get-go. I was like, that's all it took, man. Like I didn't need to play Drive Club. I saw the menu screen and I was like, I'm fucking down, man. This is my life from now on.
That's awesome. That menu screen was just like, my God, so many people at all the different Sony headquarters all around the world had input on that. It was so crazy. It was such a process. We had all this like concept art going out. It was like such an intense process. But at the end of the day, like it just shows you their commitment to like a vision, right? Like, and the fact that they were able to get enough of them around to nail that down is kind of a big deal, because usually when you get all those cooks in a kitchen, you just end up with like a pile of shit, right? But those guys, like they were able to kind of corral their feedback and get it all together, and we were able to ship the first one. And after we shipped the first one, they were like, oh, we love this format, let's just do one every year, which is what they did.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Jay, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you spending some time with us today and giving us some insight.
Absolutely.
Talking about this game that we've loved for so long. It's unfortunate that the story had to end this way, but hopefully it means that you guys are on to bigger and better things, and I really hope that you stay in touch and keep us posted on what's happening in the future.
Absolutely, Brian. You've been an awesome support for us over the years. I know that Matt's been chatting with you for a long time, and there's some of you guys that really like made us and made Starblood. So we always got your back. So it's cool, man.
Thank you. And before we take off, you guys do have a final tournament coming up, right? You have an announcement for that?
We do.
All right. Well, we're going to put the URL to link to the tournament information in the description of this video. We're going to pin it to the comments, and that way everyone can get involved and give Starblood one last final hurrah all together.
Sweet.
Okay.
Let's do it. It'll be great.
Awesome, Jay. Thank you so much for your time, man. We'll be in touch.
All right. Take it easy, Brian.
Bye-bye. All right, you guys. That does it for the developer interview here with Without Parole. Obviously, this was a much different interview, a much different video than the ones we usually do. Jay had a story to tell, and I just wanted to let him tell it. And I'm really glad he shared all that information with us. It sucks that Starblood Arena is going away. We only have 4 months. It's the last day of the service will be up July 25th, 2019. So it's right around the corner. So if you own the game already, if you bought it, if you got it for free on PlayStation Plus, let's send this thing off with a bang, and let's make sure that we play the crap out of it before we can't play it anymore. So that's it. Make sure you come back next Saturday for another developer interview. As always, I'm Brian Paul, and I love you all.